Good afternoon, Ben. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Happy holidays to you.
To
Well,
you
we're in
too.
that season. We're in that season, but a lot is happening. And I just want to go through a quick lightning round with you.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
let's start with Dan Goldman's seat.
Okay.
Does it mean that Alexa Aviles has decided to step aside? Um, and obviously, incoming Mayor Mamdani has endorsed Lander. Some people, are speculating as to initially it was a job in the admin, then it went quickly to, the congressional seat, and we saw how the incoming mayor went and sort of said his piece at the DSA meeting regarding Chi, but I want to hear from you and I want to hear your thoughts. Let's start with that congressional race.
Yeah, so listen, I mean, I think there's a broad recognition on the New York left, so to speak, around trying to consolidate where possible and take on, the right fights, so to speak, that are winnable and that make sense. And they're trying to play things strategically, especially from the viewpoint of Mayor-elect Mamdani, as you saw him weigh in against Chiose running against Hakeem Jeffries. So, this is part of that. There's clearly was some sort of agreement for Mayor-elect Mamdani to support Brad Lander in this primary against Dan Goldman. And that led Alexa Vilas, the council member who DSA wanted to back and had already voted to back, to not run. You saw former Assembly member Yuli New, who came in second place to Goldman 2 cycles ago, and when the seat was open, also bow out of potentially running. So this is the broader left getting in line behind Lander, and he launches day one with endorsements from Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Jumaane Williams, the Working Families Party. I mean, this is a very powerful coalition for that district, especially the Brooklyn parts. Dan Goldman's clearly in for a very robust challenge here, but, he should not be underestimated. And he's got plenty of money to throw at this race like he did the first time around. So that's a key factor as well. But Brad Lander is going to be very formidable as a challenger here.
And I want to speak quickly on the DSA, right? Because I'm beginning to quickly see that it's more like we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as opposed to once upon a time them turning on Ocasio and this sort of purity test. I don't see that. No, I don't see that being the case anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
So
this
what
is
is so what is the bar? Is it we have a DSA member who's now mayor, and we have to sort of pick our fights and not be dogged in our, sort of constitution, so to speak, and what
yeah.
requires or what it entails to be a pure DSA member. What do you think this is about?
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting trends in New York politics right now. It's clearly there's an internal debate still going on within the New York City DSA. There are some people who are pretty uncomfortable with some of these compromises, things like reappointing Jessica Tisch as police commissioner. Not so much because of her stances on things like Israel, but that's part of it, but because she's sort of a traditional law and order police commissioner and not a major reformer, not someone who wants to help dismantle the NYPD, which has been sort of part of the goal of many members of DSA in the past, including Zora Mamdani. So this is a fascinating trend. I think it's part of the recognition among the broader left in and Democrats generally, but definitely on the left, that you got to look at the playing field and be realistic. Donald Trump is president, whether you like it or not, right? So Zoran Mamdani has to go to Washington and to some degree play nice. Otherwise, the chances of massive immigration raids and a federalized National Guard are higher. And so people are willing, some, not all, are willing to sort of, be a little more realistic here. I think push will come to shove on a whole bunch of policies as Mamdani actually comes into power and starts making a lot of decisions. I mean, you're going to get into the nitty gritty of governing and see where people are in their politics and whether they agree. I mean, things like um, everything from, policing of protests to how he deals with homeless encampments to police officer discipline. These are just a few examples where you're going to see how much leeway the broader left, especially the DSA, gives the new mayor. But just the fact that Zoran Mamdani just ran for mayor, totally moving away from his former calls to defund the police, for example, and you heard very little from his DSA base about it. People have really made some strategic decisions, and it's going to be really interesting to see where all that goes as he tries to prioritize the affordability agenda. Of course, almost everybody on the left is seeing that as sort of the stuff that he ran on and the top issues that he's going to go after, but that's not all that governing is going to entail. So we shall see very soon here.
All right, Ben, I want to hear your thoughts on this one then. There's a neighboring congressional race happening. And that's why it's interesting, because one can make the case that Antonio Reynoso is just as progressive as Brad. Uh,
If not more
well,
so.
it's similar. I mean, they're very close, very closely aligned. Why support Claire Valdez if Reynoso is arguably the same from the political, if that's the case, right?
Yeah,
Hypothetically, I know you recently talked to Tiffany Caban.
right.
They're saying that they're leaning Claire Valdez, but I just want to know what the difference is and why go with a DSA potentially
Yeah.
in that congressional district and not and tell Alexa Vilas, hey, can you move aside? What is the difference?
Well, I think the difference comes back to two major things. One is that New York 7th congressional district where Nydia Velázquez is retiring is seemingly an even more friendly DSA district than New York 10, where Dan Goldman is the incumbent. Two, actually, let me say three things. Two, Brad Lander is probably a stronger candidate against Dan Goldman than Alexa Aviles would be. And there's a little bit of just sort of understanding the base that he comes with in that district. And it's debatable, I think, whether some of those, sort of brownstone Brooklyners would vote for Aviles or Goldman. I think that would be really interesting. We're not going to get to see it, but I think that would be super interesting. But they will go with Lander to a very high degree, although there's some people certainly in brownstone Brooklyn who are leaning more towards Goldman over his stances on Israel, and it's going to be a lot of interesting debate that at times is going to probably get kind of ugly and unpleasant, especially for a lot of New York Jews. But that's what's going to happen. And then the third thing is just the other element of real politics to it, which is, listen, Brad Lander cross-endorsed with Zoran Mamdani in the primary. He helped give him a boost down the stretch. He was a loyal boost in the general election as well. And this is clearly, to some degree, Mamdani and his followers, paying that back. And that's a big piece of it. But in the 7th congressional district, it's good, as you're getting at. Antonio Reynoso is very progressive. He's got a real name in Brooklyn. He's very close with Nydia Velázquez. I'm very interested to see what she does in this primary, if anything. But DSA seems very determined to run their own candidate. So that's going to get real interesting. I want to know your take on that race and where you see that heading.
Is it if you were to handicap it, is it Valdez gets the nod over Caban and why? Why Valdez? Why not Caban?
So I just
Both
had
DSA
Tiffany Caban.
members.
Yeah, I
I
just had
know.
Tiffany Caban on my podcast, and we talked about this a little bit. You know, Claire Valdez seems to be a little bit more ascendant. She's a little newer to the scene in elected office, and seems to be a little tighter right now with some of the movement. But I think part of this also just comes back to the fact that her assembly district significantly overlaps with the 7th congressional district, whereas Tiffany Caban's city council district is almost fully in AOC's congressional district. Now, I asked Tiffany Caban about that, and she quickly said, well, I grew up basically in the 7th congressional district, and I live, barely next door to it and all that. But I think that's a little bit of a tougher sell to some.
What do you think in terms? But see, but that let's say hypothetically she jumps in. I see some of this happening as well, where some DSA in some places, right, are not stepping aside, right, and it's like sort of
I
running
don't
against each other.
DSA is has it pretty tight right now. Partly because all of these DSA elected officials have, largely agreed to abide by what the organization decides. That's part of the democratic part of the democratic socialism. So I don't see a situation where the DSA decides to back Valdez and Caban still runs, or vice versa. I think whatever the DSA,
Mm.
whoever they go with, will be the DSA candidate in the race, and it'll be a very interesting contest with Reynoso, who, um, again, he's very progressive, but in this race and others, he's also had some very good relationships with some of the Orthodox Jewish communities in Brooklyn. And so, there could definitely be something of a divide in this race related to Israel and Gaza, is what I would expect to be one of the biggest differences when it starts to unfold.
Well, Ben, let's move to a race that we don't hear that much of the DSA footprint, the Jerry Nadler congressional seat.
Mm.
Is it Michael Lasher's to lose? Meaning, is he the hands-on favorite, the Upper West Side darling?
You have to think, except you're getting into a situation where you've got, you have to tell me what the latest tally is of the number of candidates, right? It's like more than half a dozen. But one of the factors here is going to be this is a West Side plus East Side district, right? And if it's West Side versus East Side, the West Side's going to win. There's just more votes there. However,
Mhm.
in a split field, when you have a candidate in the mix like City Council member Eric Botcher to win a lot of West Side votes that Assembly member Michael Lasher is counting on, that could open the door for another candidate like East Sider Assembly member Alex Boris to win the race. So the fact that that's such a big field, now it could winnow as we get towards primary day. We're a ways off, but a split field, no ranked choice voting, right? So, that's going to be really interesting. I would still, if you made me bet on a winner right now, I would still say Michael Lasher's the favorite, but, it's very unpredictable when you get a big field like that.
Let's move north. Uh, Michael Blake, Richie Torres. Now we're hearing Amanda Septimo, an ally of the incoming mayor. What are your thoughts? Is it give me? I mean, Richie Torres has an enormous amount of money.
He has an
And
enormous
he's
amount of money, and I don't think I've seen any data that says he's unpopular with his constituents. Have you seen anything? I mean, this is the thing. You can make an argument in New York 10 that Dan Goldman is out of step with a lot of his constituents, and he's going to have to prove to them that he's not on some of these issues, especially related to Israel and Gaza, first and foremost. But even though Richie Torres seems to, be sort of an Israel hawk and doing a lot of stuff, with that doesn't seem like his constituents really care that much about it, and people could wonder why. He seems passionate about it, but at the end of the day, I don't know that his constituents are that upset about it, and that's where his challenger or challengers are going to have to make the case. It just doesn't seem like he's unpopular enough where there's this big opportunity to take him out. I'm interested to dig in more of that, and of course, we'll see how it unfolds. But and especially if he's got more than one challenger, then you start to split the opposition, and he's even more likely to win. So, we'll see how that unfolds. But right now, I don't see how that's that winnable of a race for a Torres opponent unless somebody shows me some data otherwise.
and who do you think is more formidable, arguably, between Michael Blake and Amanda Septimo? Who do you think has the best chance in a three-way race or a one-on-one race, hypothetically?
Um, I don't know that I have, he just ran for mayor, so he was out there. She's obviously continued to win her assembly seat, so she's been out there. So people have seen them both campaigning. They've voted for both of them, or at least, knew Michael Blake was running. He still has some base in the Bronx in his old assembly district and so forth. But I'm not sure at this point who actually is the stronger candidate. I don't know if you feel strongly about one or the other.
And what do you think was the ultimate reason why Julie Menin is a speaker and Crystal Hassan is not? And what was the role, if any, of the incoming mayor that you know of?
Number one, first and foremost, is Julie Menon worked her butt off for years to build relationships and make her case to her colleagues, and that really matters. Now, that's not it's not the full picture. There's always other factors in these speaker races, but she worked it really hard. She knew she wanted to be speaker a long time ago. And she worked it hard and developed those relationships and put in a lot of work. It's very telling how many also of the new members coming in, and there's not that many of them, but she got all the new members basically who just got elected to be part of her coalition. Now, some of that could be uh, the sort of indication that it's inevitable she's going to win and you're a new member and you want to be with the speaker and all of that, but like she made it work. That's how it goes. So that's one. Two is it's a very progressive city council, but that doesn't mean that it's socialist, and it doesn't mean that, again, in the general election, this city was split basically 50-50 Mamdani versus non-Mamdani, right? So there's a lot of districts out there that did not support Mamdani, and a lot of those council members were not looking for a more progressive council speaker to partner with him. They were looking for someone a little more moderate and to be a strong counterforce. Now, that doesn't mean Menon won't work with Mamdani on a lot. She will, but she's certainly her own more moderate, not moderate exactly. She's very liberal, but she's sort of in that direction. I think those are the two big things. She worked really hard, and she's seen as a little bit more of a counterforce and a check on Mamdani. And she's got a ton of experience in city government, and I think that probably appealed to people too.
What do you think Crystal could have done more of to pull it
Well,
off?
earlier
If
work. I mean, this is, like I said, the key to Menon winning. This was the key to Corey Johnson winning when he won. It's the reason Justin Brannon was a favorite when he didn't win last time, but that took some twists and turns. It's early work. But the other thing also is the Progressive Caucus didn't stay together. Menon picked off members of the Progressive Caucus.
Mm.
So there was something of a failure of the progressive movement in the city. The Working Families Party and others didn't I don't think do the work. And then also, if Zohran Mamdani has started to get involved in this race during the general election, things might have gone differently, right? He was the likely next mayor as soon as he won the primary. Now, he knew he had a fight in the general, so he had to focus on that. But if he had spent a little more political capital in the general election trying to make sure he had Crystal Hudson or maybe Amanda Farias or another progressive as the speaker, it could have potentially gone differently. But I also don't think Mamdani and his people see Julie Menon as that big a problem, and I'm not
Mm.
sure if they should. We'll see, but they didn't put in that work either.
Ben, let's move to the state now. Governor Hochul, now she's getting obviously more folks on the right are coalescing. But her numbers are moving in the right direction. I don't know. Have you seen any traction from Lieutenant Governor Delgado? And in your humble opinion, does she just skate into another term? I mean, she's got the money, and her numbers are getting better, right? In terms of right, there was a point where people saw her as she was vulnerable to again a primary. But what are your thoughts on the more recent developments and stuff? And does a Mamdani will do you think does that stick? Meaning, I'm pretty sure they're going to bludgeon her right in other parts of the state with a perceived allegiance with incoming Mayor Mamdani, right?
So here's a couple things that I think happens, and again, we're talking here in December, so could
Yeah, it's
change.
very early, very early.
Well, but it's only, it's 6.5 months till primary day, right? So, um, first on the primary, Antonio Delgado has gotten a few endorsements from a few, left wing groups. Some of the environmentalists are very upset with Hochul about the gas pipeline, and they'll probably go with him and things like that. But I've seen very little indication that there's going to be any big progressive movement behind Delgado. Listen, one of the biggest gifts politically to Kathy Hochul is that Donald Trump is the president. It just totally takes the air out of the possibility of a progressive challenger to her. And then it also helps her in the general election, most likely with a lot of the independent voters and swingy voters, not on Long Island probably, but in Westchester and some of the northern suburbs who do not like Donald Trump. Um, on the Mamdani issue, this is the big bet that Hochul made endorsing him in the general election. Her big bet is the Republicans are going to use Zohran Mamdani against me no matter what. It could be a little more powerful if I endorse him. Okay. But if I endorse him and we work closely together, he can harness his movement to help me. And that help is a lot more valuable than the hurt. And that's the calculation. Will it be true? We'll see. I don't know that the general election is going to be a cakewalk, even with Trump in office, even with a Republican nominee, whether it's Bruce Blakeman or Elise Stefanik, that is very Trump aligned. I think there's a lot of Republican votes in New York State. We saw that with Lee Zeldin in 2022. Now, Trump wasn't in office, but uh, we'll see what it looks like as it gets closer to the fall. But I expect Hochul to win the primary easily at this point. We'll see. And I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk in the general, but she's clearly a strong favorite, especially if Donald Trump stays unpopular, broadly and especially among independents.
Ben, let's talk about transition. What are you hearing and what are your thoughts so far on some of the decisions the incoming mayor has made?
Well, I think
Are you open to predictions, Ben?
sure. I mean, maybe you could try me.
Chancellor. Is Melissa
Um,
Vilas Ramos the going to remain as chancellor? Similar to Police Commissioner Tisch?
See, this is the problem. To do the two biggest appointments that are not deputy mayors as holdovers, it starts to, it'll develop a narrative that he doesn't want, I don't think. Can you get past that? Absolutely. But I don't know that, he and his team will love the idea of there being this narrative that on the two biggest commissioner positions, he's keeping Eric Adams' people. So we'll see. If that wasn't the case, I would think he would keep Chancellor Vilas Ramos on for at least a while. And I think he still might, or at least through this school year. So, that's the tricky thing about a mayoral transition in January. It's right in the middle of the school year. It's good to have continuity leading the school system. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but I think there's a chance that he at least waits a little while to name a chancellor. But, he might decide he just wants his own person. So we'll see on that.
What do you think any other thoughts on transition so
Yeah.
far?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think Dean Foolihan was an extremely smart move as first deputy mayor. Mamdani continues to play the long game here. He's being very careful. He's trying to make sure that, he's keeping criticism at bay from people who think he's too inexperienced and people worried about public safety. So there's the Tisch appointment and all that. He knows he ran on affordability. He has to deliver on affordability. So he needs to take care of public safety. So that's not a big distraction. We'll see what happens. But so that's that. And that's it. We've got three appointments so far, right? Elle Bisgard Church was obviously going to come in as either a senior advisor or chief of staff. She'll be chief of staff. Of course, that makes sense. Um, I'm waiting to see, the next thing will probably be the other deputy mayors. So we'll see what happens there. One of the biggest ones I'm watching for is whether he brings on Dan Garodnick from city planning to be the deputy mayor for housing and economic development, or who knows what he calls these deputy mayor positions. He could always tinker a bit, but I think that would be an interesting one. Again, that would be another move that's continuity with Eric Adams. So you get into these narrative issues, but Dan Garodnick is very, very well respected figure, and I think is in the running for that position clearly, but we'll see where he goes.
Let's talk about the national play, the federal play now, and the incoming mayor. Obviously, a Congress member and minority leader Hakeem Jeffries has sort of pushed back and beat back and the DSA charge, at least for his seat. But there is some sort of ripples. Stephanie Zinnerman, the Jabari Brisport and Chi conversations and their differences with the minority leader. What about Senator Schumer? Someone who we've heard very little, and I mean, he chose not to endorse, but there's been whispers, right, that it's his time as well, right? Or people might be coming for that seat. Any news on that front? Because that's actually been extremely low key considering some of the federal primaries, right? Goldman and
Yeah, well, his race is 2 more years out, right? So, we'll see.
but you need a runway. You need a runway to
Absolutely, and
take on
you
someone
need to
as formidable as Senator Schumer, right?
absolutely. So, one of the big questions in New York politics and national politics, right, is what's AOC going to do? So, I don't know. We don't know what she's going to do. Is she going to run for Senate? Is she going to run for president and then maybe either wind up, the presidential nominee for the Democrats or maybe the vice presidential nominee or something like that? Who knows? So we'll see. I think there's a decent chance that Schumer doesn't run for reelection in 28, but that's just me speculating given some of the poll numbers, some of the rumors about how much people are pushing AOC to challenge him or announce she's running and then edge him closer to the door. A lot of this will come down to what happens around Senate races around the country in 2026 and the playing field, that Democrats and Republicans have more broadly, because Chuck Schumer is the Senate minority leader. He was the Senate majority leader briefly. So he's got a shot to be Senate majority leader again. You don't walk away from that position. If you're New Yorkers, this was very key to the Mamdani Chiose conversation, right? Hakeem Jeffries could be the Speaker of the House in like 5 minutes. So we don't want to risk that for New York. So that would be a huge part of the conversation, as well as the calculations around will Chuck Schumer potentially be Senate Majority Leader again? And that will influence his view of running again and the view of people about whether to take him on.
Ben, what would you advise incoming Mayor Mamdani first 100 days? Three big ticket items. That just told me. I mean,
Yeah.
look, De Blasio came in.
Yeah.
He didn't ban horse carriages like
Ha.
he said he would, right? It's still
Yeah.
an on,
Still,
but
still happening. Yeah.
he went hard. I remember paid sick leave
Yep.
right off the bat, and obviously universal pre-K.
Yep.
Uh, he went hard. What are some of your recommendations if you were? Because look, Ben, you talk to Jan Lieber, you go across the board here. You don't just talk to the elected officials class. So I know you had a recent forum on with some past deputy mayors and
Yep.
government types to talk transition. Again, what are three things he needs to get right to get that average run-of-the-mill New Yorker to say, "Hey, I'm in good hands. The
Well,
world's not coming to an end here."
Well, you just got a really good one, right? I don't think he's going to try to come in and ban horse carriages, but one of the biggest things is don't get distracted with something that isn't, broadly as important as other things are to New Yorkers, right? So he seems to understand that very well. That's part of how he organized his whole campaign around these affordability issues because they impact so many New Yorkers, right? So stay focused is a key one, which I think they don't need my advice on that, right? But that's such a key one to not get involved in some of these sideshows. And I think, that's part of how they're approaching some of these congressional races too, is being careful about where he's going to play, um, and how much he's going to focus on the political side of things. But the appointments are so key. Setting up the government right, making sure that you have highly experienced, qualified people at these agencies. And so the biggest concern there is, does he start to appoint people more because of, past ideological alignment than their qualifications for actually running a city agency and being able to deliver services or manage well? You can bring some of those people in as policy advisors or, uh, part of the leadership team at a city agency, as long as the commissioner you're hiring is okay with that. You don't want to set that up for bad blood, but you have to be really careful about some of the hires. And we saw Eric Adams, of course, shoot himself in the foot with some of his sort of crony hires that were deeply mistaken. Now, I don't think Mamdani is going to do that, but he's got other considerations on that. And then the other thing is, which again, he clearly knows, though, is he's got to approach this first state budget and state legislative session really smartly and start to figure out with Governor Hochul, which I'm sure they're going to do together, some of where they can compromise on his big ticket promises and what he's willing to call a win, right? She doesn't want to have big infighting leading into her primary and her general election. She doesn't want to do a lot on raising taxes, but she seems open to a little, maybe on the corporate side. So he needs to figure out what are we getting as a win on childcare? What are we getting as a win on some kind of step towards free buses? Maybe it's another new pilot program, but it's multiple lines in each borough, not one line like the past pilot program, right? What are those state budget wins going to be? And then the rent guidelines board. This is going to be perhaps the number one clear test for his first 6 months in office, besides the basics of city government and the state budget session, is can he deliver on the rent freeze at the rent guidelines board? And that is going to come up real fast. And that is going to be one of the most interesting things. I interviewed one of the public members of the rent guidelines board. So there's two tenant representatives, two landlord, and five public members, all appointed by the mayor. And what this housing expert, Alex Armlovich, told me was he's skeptical of rent freezes when the economic data doesn't point to it. But if Mamdani is smart around other things that he works on to help landlords with their costs, it makes the justification for a rent freeze at the rent guidelines board more palatable. So there are very interesting tests in front of Mamdani about how he balances delivering on that promise. And that again comes back to whether he can be smart about some of the other pieces on the field, working with the city council, working with the state legislature, working with the governor.
Last three questions.
Oh boy. Okay.
Up or down? Does State Senator Jessica Ramos lose her Senate seat to
Oof.
Assembly Member Jessica Gonzalez Rojas?
Oof.
That's
Um,
another part of the collateral damage, so to speak, right?
yep.
Of the decisions or the endorsements that came out of the primary. How would you handicap
You
it?
know this district better than me. What do you say?
No, no, wait, wait.
This is your show. You don't have to answer.
That's
Um, listen,
one of the things of being, having a podcast, right? You can make
yeah,
a.
no,
Go ahead. I'm
I'm here to
sorry.
answer the questions. No, it's okay. I wanna sort of go out on a limb here and say I think Ramos keeps her seat. Um,
Hmm.
it feels like when I say go out on a limb, it just feels like, there's so much momentum building behind Gonzalez Rojas that will overwhelm Ramos. But again, that's like, how much did these endorsements matter? I don't know. We'll see. If Zoran Mamdani comes in big for Gonzalez Rojas and his operation and the DSA, then probably she's going to win. So I should, really qualify that. The issue here is just why, like, what's the argument against Jessica Ramos? She endorsed Andrew Cuomo in the primary. Okay, but what about her record? Is there anything in her record other than that she doesn't always play nice in the sandbox that is the reason that she needs to go? She's got an incredibly strong policy and budget record. So this is the case that I still don't hear against her, is like, what's really the reason for unseating her? The main thing that her opponents say is she doesn't get along well with others. Now, that can matter in policy, but she's still got all these policy accomplishments.
Mhm,
So,
mhm, mhm.
I want to see that one play out. I know I started by saying I'll go out on a limb and say she keeps her seats, but obviously it almost keeps her seat. But it does feel like she's going to be the underdog in her reelection bid. So we'll see.
I would say this, and I will sort of chime in.
All right.
There's an old song by the OJs called "Where Are All My Friends?"
Yeah,
Now, this begs the question. You're the labor chair, and she's done a lot for labor.
exactly.
I'd like to see where they land on this, right? And whether they reciprocate the sort of love she's shown them, right, throughout her time as labor chair and in the state senate. But
Yep.
we shall see.
Yep.
The other part is, have we seen the last of Andrew Cuomo? There were rumors that he might be even running for governor.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
he sent out a letter about the state of the party, and have we seen the last of him?
No, I'm gonna say we haven't seen the last of him.
Interesting.
That's all I got for it. I don't know what he does, but hey, listen,
Hmm.
he
What do you think is his easy? What do you think is the path of least resistance for a reemergence? If you were advising Andrew Cuomo, let's say he asked Ben Max, how do I get back in the game? How do I get elected to something? And what do you think is his easiest path?
state controller,
Hmm.
you know, joint,
Wow.
Tom DiNapoli's got three challengers and counting, so jump into that race and just sail on name recognition and uh, his base that, he sort of still has in the city, especially. I don't think he'll do that, but, I haven't thought about this enough about whether he'll look at the governor's race and see the primary with Hochul and Delgado and think, there's a way that if it's three-way, he can win it. I mean, listen, he just got beat by Mamdani twice, but he got a lot of votes. He really did get a lot of votes. So, as much as I've been, you know, everywhere I talk about him in the race, very clear that he's got a lot of very real baggage, very real questions about his background that are not, you know, all political as he likes to claim. He's still got a lot of votes. So if you're a politician, you think about what to do with those voters as soon as possible before they
Yeah,
forget.
yeah, yeah. And draw the distinction. City votes. That doesn't include Nassau, Suffolk, right? Other parts of the state or suburban, Westchester, Rockland, and other places. So
But that doesn't mean those are his voters, really. There's a percentage that are, but a lot of it was anti-Mamdani, right? So,
mhm.
every election's about choices and the candidates. So I don't know how much of that vote, but that's part of Hochul's calculation with the Mamdani stuff. She needs those Mamdani voters in the city because she doesn't have a base in the city. And that's been one of her weaknesses. So
Three most influential books you've ever read, and where does Ben Max get his news? What informs Ben Max when he's prepping for these conversations? I know it's a two-pronged question, but what are the three books that have shaped the way you view
well,
the
let me
world?
start. Let me start with the latter. So I am. I mean, I'm sort of all over the place. I try to read as much as possible, and I do it both, news publications and articles, and then I do as much as I can of like the primary sources, right? So I read as much as I can the actual legislation, which is hard sometimes because it's time consuming and it's a little, sometimes in a little bit of complicated language. But I really do try to read the direct source when possible, and sometimes it's very accessible. I try to read the government reports. I try to read the press, releases with the reports and all that to try to see exactly what's coming from the elected officials and the government offices and all that. And then I also read, the news coverage in places like Politico and City and State. And, I don't want to leave, city limits and Hellgate.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah. I
I could
get it.
go
I
down
get
the
it.
whole
Yeah, I
list.
get it. Yes,
There's
yes,
so many
correct.
good ones. But I do really try to, like, so right now I'm preparing to do an interview related to Airbnb. So I'm trying to read all the relevant Airbnb legislation of recent years to actually know what's in the laws, um so that's, that I don't know. Most influential, I didn't, unfortunately, I know you've asked people this before and I really should have thought about it. I don't know
It's
why I
all
didn't
right.
on the books. Let me say, I want to let me just shout out recent books I've read, if that's okay.
That's fine.
So Nicole Gelinas of the Manhattan Institute, who also writes at the Times, in the opinion section, wrote a book called Movement about decades of policy around, how we move around the city. And it's really good. I mean, it's basically a history with analysis, and it's all about, reclaiming public space from the automobile after there was a huge, shift towards being accommodating to cars, and the Robert post Robert Moses era and all this, and it's so well done and it's so readable, even though it's very thick. People shouldn't get too intimidated by it. I haven't finished it, but I've been reading Abundance because it's influencing so much of our policy debate. So I've been reading some of that book by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein. Um, and then on the same theme, I just started this book, Unfinished Metropolis by Benjamin Schneider, that is, again, about housing and transit and how cities are planned and built. And so that's all the stuff up my alley. I'm like, I don't, my reading for pleasure is still reading for work. So
Who's who's the holy grail for Ben Max in terms of interview?
interview. Hmm. I'd like to interview Mike Bloomberg. I haven't interviewed him. I would love to get an
Ooh.
interview in with him. I haven't really tried in recent years, so I should ask, but I'd really be interested in his reflections if he'd speak candidly about, his mayoralty and then what's come since. He obviously weighed in on the mayoral race to back Andrew Cuomo, even though I think he had a lot of skepticism about Cuomo. He obviously was not a Mamdani fan, but I'd be really interested to talk to Bloomberg about some of the reflections on his 3 terms, plus, a real conversation about the de Blasio years and the Eric Adams years and, what we've learned and all that. So that would be a good one.
Any person that you've interviewed that has impressed you or punched above their weight or just you were
Oh
sort of
man, a
taken
lot of
aback
a
by their
lot of
just
people, you know,
intellectual or
not that
understanding of policy and politics?
yeah, not that I'm at all trying to push for her or anything, but I had the school's chancellor on the podcast in September, and I did not know her, which is unusual. Like I usually kind of know, some of these people before I interview them. I didn't know her, and she really impressed me. She's a longtime veteran of the school system, but that doesn't always mean that people are like real sharp on all the topics I might throw at them. And she was really good. And like also came across as a real person, which is a nice combination. So she impressed me. And we just had a live event on the morning of December 10th when we're talking here with Julie Menon at the law school. And I knew this already, but she was really sharp and impressive as well.
Ben, thank you for your time. Anything you want to say that I didn't ask you or mention?
Oh man, we got to a lot. Thanks, Roberto. This was great. I mean, there's plenty of other interesting stuff going on, but that was a lot. So this was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry we went over, but
No, this was fun.
there's a lot of meat on that bone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care, buddy. All the best.
You too.